If you have a geopolitical unit that becomes a new country, if it was a governorship in an empire, a republic in the Soviet Union, a federal state in Yugoslavia, the borders of that unit are the borders of the new state. And this is called the Iuti Potestatis principle in Latin, and it governs the borders of new countries around the world. So if you look and apply that to Israel, what were the borders of the previous entity in this territory? So the previous entity was the Mandate for Palestine. And the borders of the Mandate for Palestine were very clear at the moment of its termination. They were the borders of what we would call today Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Israel became the new country in the territory of the Mandate, and so presumptively Israel's borders would be the full borders of mandatory Palestine.
But Israel has never extended sovereignty over the areas it conquered in 1967. How could Israel possibly include territory it's never claimed as its own?
So the question of extending sovereignty only applies if sovereignty didn't exist in the first place. You only extend sovereignty to places where you previously didn't have it. Now, the fact that Israel has a different system of rule in, for example, the West Bank, doesn't mean that it is not sovereign. Countries can have multiple systems of rule within the same sovereign territory. And indeed, the fact that Israel has specifically applied Israeli law to East Jerusalem shows that Israel does indeed think that it has a sovereign claim over this territory.
But the rest of the territory it governs under the laws of belligerent occupation, on its own terms.
So it does not govern them under the laws of belligerent occupation. Rather, it chooses to apply some of the rules of belligerent occupation in order to have international calm. And the reason for this is quite clear. The government said this in 1967. Israel believes it has a sovereign claim to this territory, but wants, ideally, in some future peace negotiation, to be able to spin it off and give it away to someone or create a different country in it.
If the West Bank is part of sovereign Israel, surely it's not a question of discretion whether we give full citizenship to all the Palestinians who live there.
Indeed, it is a question of discretion if part of the idea is to hopefully, in the views of the government of Israel, give away some of this territory. Then giving citizenship to the Palestinians would make it almost impossible to create a Palestinian state, because the Palestinians would, of course, already be citizens of Israel. But the Palestinians have been given something different. They've been given their own government, which governs every aspect of their lives. If Palestinians were to be given the right to vote, for example, in Israeli elections, as the Palestinians in East Jerusalem have been, that would mean they can't vote for the Palestinian National Authority. And the Palestinians clearly prefer and are probably happier voting for a government that represents their views rather than just being another faction in the Knesset.
Do the Palestinians have a right to self-determination?
So in international law, it is thought that all peoples have a right to self-determination. The right to have autonomy in one's local decisions, linguistic autonomy, religious autonomy. It is not the right to have an independent country. And the evidence of that is there are over 3,000 independent secessionist movements around the world. There are tens of thousands of ethnic groups, and no one thinks that they all are entitled, as a right of their right to self-determination, to have their own country. So, for example, the Catalans. What's Spain's response to Catalonian claims of self-determination? They say, okay, so we will give you self-determination by letting you speak your language, write business papers in your language. That does not mean you get your own country. The Palestinians have a level of self-determination unrivaled by any separatist group around the world. That is to say, they effectively have most aspects of a country that governs all of their internal lives.
The Security Council, the General Assembly, and the International Court of Justice have all declared that the territories are occupied. How could they all be wrong?
Political bodies can act in political ways. International law is about applying rules that are general and plugging in the facts of particular situations. So the Security Council has not said that eastern Ukraine is occupied. The Security Council has not said that Abkhazia, part of Georgia, is occupied. They have not said that Nagorno-Karabakh is occupied. So when you look at the rules that the international community develops and you apply them, you see that their judgment is obviously a political judgment.
Professor Kontorovich, thank you very much.